Hey, welcome back to the group for week 2 of Forward. You should be quite familiar by now that that is just what we're calling this season we're stepping into as a church. And as a reminder, through Forward, we're building bridges to people in our community so that they might walk across them and into a relationship with Jesus. And remember that our primary goal is 100% engagement, just meaning we want everyone who's a part of Christ Church to take a next step and go forward. And I hope that you are beginning to ask God how he might want you to be involved. Because I'm fully believing that as we go on this journey together, that the next 2 years would be the greatest years of generosity we've ever seen that would allow us to take some next steps in our vision and mission. So I hope you've had an amazing week full of some rock kazakh. And if for some reason you missed week number 1, you're going to want to go back and get caught up, because it is so central to everything that's going to happen going forward. The idea of being strong and courageous to move from where you are to what God has for you, empowered by the belief that God is with us every step of the way, that's the foundation and what we're going to need, that strength and that courage to take a step of faith. Last week when we left Joshua and the Hebrew people, they were essentially in the locker room and getting the pregame speech. They're hyped and they're ready to go. This week they're stepping into the action on the field. And when you come to Joshua chapter 3, you see that there's something that stands between where they are now and the future that God has promised to them. It is a little thing called the Jordan River. And all Joshua has to do is get some probably 2 million people from one side over to the other side. And you say, well, that doesn't really sound like a big problem. Let me assure you it's a problem. And you're going to read about it in your group, but I really don't want you to miss just a couple of things here. So you could literally stand on one side of the Jordan and see all of the things that are waiting for you on the other. The Jordan River is mentioned some almost 200 times in the scripture. It's probably no more than 75 feet wide at its largest point. It starts at the highest mountain in Israel at about 9,000 feet and descends down into the lowest point on the face of the earth, the Dead Sea, at 1,400 feet below sea level. The banks are almost vertical, and the river's about 10 feet deep during the normal season. And you're going to read that it was flood season. So you picture a fast-moving river that is now larger than usual. And the instruction from God to Joshua and the people is that to step into what he has promised them, they need to get from one side to the other side. And it's going to be the priests, okay, those who represent the people to God and God to the people, who are going to lead the way. And you're going to read in verse 13 how God is going to do all of this, okay? And it just simply says this: when their feet come to rest in the water. Now, I like to imagine what kind of step they took when they're getting in. It's not like they had a gradual bank to walk down where you kind of anchor yourself with one foot behind and you kind of test the water with the other foot. No, when you step in, you're in. That water is going to stop and divide, or they're going to be in over their head. And I think, understandably so, that many of us would stand right on the edge of that river asking God to part the water, assuring him that we'll be the first ones across when he does that. But it was their commitment that God was looking for, right? Their commitment that causes him to act when they take that step. Now, I've tried to tell you that this is more than a generosity initiative, that this really is a spiritual growth opportunity. But let me just use generosity as the example here. If you have your Forward guide or you've become familiar with it, if you were to move all the way to the very last page on the inside of what you were given there are a series of next steps specific to generosity. I want to suggest specifically in regards to this initiative that you will need some faith to take your next step. Remember what I said last week, that we're undertaking a pretty hefty goal, and we can likely meet it if everyone does something. What I'm asking us to do is to take our next step. That's it. And if you were to look at that chart right there, you could figure out maybe where you were and then what your next step would be, and then take it. And that's going to take some faith. Now, if that step is achievable without faith, let me encourage you to take 2 steps. Now, listen, I've read the entire story several times recently. I can tell you that nowhere in the entire story of Joshua does God move until the people move. I mean, if God doesn't do his part, they're not getting to the promise. But God doesn't do his part until the people take their step. See, the water doesn't stop and then they walk across. I mean, the miracle is that an entire river stops because they took a step of faith. Right? God does the miracle, but you take the step of faith. Rivers stop when you step by faith. Your faith activates God's movement. And I think it's likely that many times we're waiting on God to do something in our lives, and God's waiting for us to take a step of faith. And then when he sees that, he moves into action on our behalf. Nothing's going to happen until you put your feet in the water. So, here's the question. Where is God asking you to take a step of faith so that you can walk into something he has planned for you?